Hi, my name is Sarah, and I chose to do my article presentation on an article titled Peer Dislike and Victimization Pathways from ADHD to Depression. Now, a little overview of ADHD. ADHD is actually classified as a neurodevelopmental disorder in the DSM. The essential feature of ADHD is a persistent pattern of inattention or hyperactivity that interferes with the functioning or development of the individual diagnosed with ADHD. Now, symptoms must appear before the age of 12 for a diagnosis of ADHD, and this disorder occurs in about 5% of children and about 2.5% of adults. Typically, this disorder will tend to decrease over time and eventually phase out into adulthood, which is why you see the difference of percentages between children and adults. Sometimes it does continue into adulthood, which is why you see the 2.5% of adults with this disorder. Now, ADHD and depression, there are commonly comorbid disorders, and the comorbidity of these two disorders actually leads to an increased severity and duration of ADHD. And possible reasons for the development of depression, sometimes it just arises directly from the symptoms of ADHD, or it can develop through other intermediate problems such as peer dislike or victimization of bullying. Now, why is this important? Well, this is important because, like I previously stated, the effects of depression on ADHD is pretty severe because it can lead to more severe and longer-term symptoms of ADHD. But also, being able to understand this relation can help us with the possibility of being able to combat the development of depression, which would, of course, decrease the amount of depression that we see today. So in the literature review section of my article, they noted that previous studies have saw that peer rejection was seen to be associated with depressive, anxious behavior in girls and not in boys. There was a previous correlation that has been found between victimization and depression with ADHD. And also, there was other studies that did not find any evidence to suggest any of this relation. So the study's goal is just to better understand the pathways from ADHD symptoms to depression through peer dislike and victimization. The hypotheses that the researchers had, there was three, and the first one is that ADHD symptoms are associated with peer dislike and victimization. Number two, peer dislike and victimization increased the risk for subsequent depression. And number three, the effect of ADHD symptoms on depression is partially mediated through peer dislike and victimization. Now, the researchers, they didn't really have a hypothesis for this next one, but they did just want to see if there were any differences in gender for the development of depression in kids with ADHD. So, how did they do this? Well, they used participants, of course, and they recruited participants from 5 different towns in the Netherlands, from both urban and rural areas. In order to be included in the study, the participants had to be in primary school. 2,230 participants consented to this study. Based on information that was provided during the study, the sample was reduced to 728 participants. 54% were girls, and between the ages of 11 and 25. And I'll be going over what the information was that had the researchers reduce their sample size. The researchers conducted this study in 2 waves. The first wave was from September 2003 to December 2004, and the second wave was from October 2008 to September 2010. Now, in the first wave, the researchers actually measured ADHD symptoms, and they did this 3 different ways in order for them to see if the ADHD symptoms occur in more than one setting, which is a one of the things that qualifies a diagnosis for ADHD. So the first thing they did was administer a child behavior checklist to the parents so that they could measure if the symptoms occur at home. Then they gave the children a youth self-report survey to see how they perceive their symptoms. And then to account for any ADHD symptoms in the school, they gave the teachers a teacher's checklist of psychopathology. If students reported any depressive symptoms in this time, then they were actually excluded from the study, and that was one of the ways that the researchers reduced their sample size. And along with this, in the first wave, the participants also filled out peer nominations in their class to determine peer dislike and victimization. The participants were given a list of their classmates and were told to indicate whom in their class they disliked and whom they bullied. Participants who did not have any classmates reported them being disliked or bullied were removed from the sample. So that's just another way that they reduced the sample size as well. In the second wave, after the time had elapsed, the researchers determined if there was a presence of depression and ADHD using the Composite International Diagnostic Interview, which is a structured diagnostic interview designed to assess for lifetime and current diagnoses according to definitions and criteria outlined in the DSM. So they used a variety of different statistical analysis. I'm actually just going to jump to the table that was provided in the article to kind of just explain how they use their statistical analysis. So they did use a Cox regression analysis for most of their different variables, and overall they found that 12% of the adolescents developed depression. 76 of those of the 12% were actually girls. There was a weak but statistically significant relationship with ADHD and peer dislike, along with ADHD and victimization. Now, the first table actually presents the effects of peer dislike and victimization on major depression onset. With each unit rise in peer dislike score, the risk for developing depression increased by 1.4 times. And actually, with victimization, initially there was an increase for depression by 1.6 times, but it actually started to gradually decrease over a 2-year period. And now in Table 2, it shows the effects of ADHD on major depression onset before and after adjusting for low peer status and victimization. So peer dislike mediated 4% of the effects of ADHD symptoms on depression, whereas victimization mediated 3%. It also showed an initial risk for developing depression was higher, but then decreased over time. In boys, peer dislike and victimization did not mediate effects of ADHD on depression, but for girls, peer dislike mediated 7% and victimization mediated 3%. And so the conclusion that they made of their results is that ADHD symptoms were associated with peer dislike and victimization. Peer dislike and victimization and symptoms of ADHD increases the risk for depressive outcomes. Peer dislike and victimization mediated to a limited extent the paths to depression, but this was only seen in girls and not in boys with ADHD. And the weak associations that they saw could have been because a lot of peers actually admire the disruptive behavior classified by ADHD, and the support from their peers actually can protect them from dislike and victimization. And not all kids with ADHD are susceptible to peer dislike and victimization. So what does this all mean? So the researchers actually explained that there are several interventions that should be aimed at improving peer relations for children with ADHD to reduce their risk for developing depression, and that there should really be a focus on developing sensitive environment in schools and community in response to ADHD symptoms. So interventions to make the community and school more conducive for children with ADHD instead of trying to integrate them in non-favorable environments. So a limitation is that the researchers did not follow up on peer relations of the participants. They only followed up on depressive symptoms, if depressive symptoms developed. And it was also unknown if individuals with ADHD were receiving treatment, thus bettering their interaction with peers. So this is the article I used. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. I know I did. And if you want to check it out, you're welcome to. Thank you.